going on vacation and I'd come back and nothing moved. I mean, not one thing. I thought to myself, I can't do this. Like, I need a break. I can't be trying to do things that aligned with your business and objectives, but yet we were at a stalemate. So I decided that I had to make a shift.
Hello, and welcome to Working Your Way, the podcast dedicated to exploring the journey of authenticity in the workplace and discovering how to navigate it your way. I'm your host, Sandhya Sudhakar, and my guest today is Edina Kalamperovic. She's a senior vice president at Publicis Groupe, the second largest communications group in the world. Edina grew up as the child of immigrant parents from Montenegro, and she used her immigrant mindset to drive success in her career, becoming a senior leader at one of the world's largest marketing and digital business transformation companies. In this episode, we dive into Edina's career path, exploring how she navigated various roles and overcame challenges by staying true to her three guiding principles of purpose, grit, and character. And she always stayed focused on making an impact as her main measure of success. Edina shares how she brings a startup mentality to large organizations to create that impact and to dive headfirst with passion into messy, ambiguous business problems. In this episode, we discuss the importance of self-reflection and knowing what matters to you, navigating or hopefully recognizing and preventing burnout, and the power of authenticity in the leaders that we work for. I can't wait to share this episode with you. Let's get into the conversation. Welcome, Edina. It's really exciting to have you on Working Your Way. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, so we're going to get really into the twists and turns of your career and the successes that you've experienced. But I always really love a good immigrant story. And so would you share a little bit about how your family ended up here in this country?
You've come to the right place. You've asked the right person. My parents, so I'm firstborn American. My parents immigrated here from Montenegro, which is part of the former Yugoslavia. They came, many, many years ago before I was born. And I think like what I've at least heard, like many immigrants where, we've got a strong population in New York, and then we've got some in Chicago. And so one person will come, and then they will pull over other people, and then people just started coming to either New York or Chicago. And so we've got a community here. It's a small country in general. There are like 500,000 people back home, so it's not a big country. But that's how they got here. And it was interesting growing up with immigrant parents because my parents didn't come here for the culture per se. They came here for opportunity, for financial expansion, to help their family back home. And so, living one foot in, my American life and one foot in my Montenegrin life, you've got you're living in both worlds constantly. So I think anybody that has a child of immigrant parents or an immigrant themselves can understand the culture clash, and kind of the experiences that come with that. So.
Yeah, I've heard this term like kind of being a third culture kid because it's like,
yeah,
you're not American enough and you're not, in my case, Indian enough, but
yeah.
It's like you're somewhere in between. What kind of impact did that have on you growing up?
So I actually wrote a blog about this on my Substack. It's called Think Like an Immigrant. But one of the call outs I had there is that as a child, I wanted to be nothing associated with having immigrant parents. And, I apologize to my parents for that, for that many years later, but
same. Yeah.
I wanted to be, Jenny Johnson, and I wanted my parents to be Jack and Jill and do American things. And that's what I wanted. I didn't want to have a funny last name. I didn't want to have, a first name that people were like, where are you from? What is this? So I think in my, childhood, I was, not excited about it. I didn't like the fact that my mother would make me homemade lunch, or she wouldn't let me buy Lunchables. I didn't like the fact that, I had to convince my parents that trick-or-treating was okay. And so like there were things that were, that were foreign to them, that were, American. And so, yeah, so that was kind of the younger part of me. But then I think as I grew older, went to university, got into, the corporate world, I realized that a lot of what I saw my parents do, a lot of the stories, and advice that my parents would give all benefited me. And so I think it's really, I say now, like I think like an immigrant, and I'm proud of saying that. And I do that. And I think it's three core things. It's having a purpose, something larger than you, having grit, being able to work through really difficult things. I mean, if I think about, my parents as well as many other that have come over, you don't know the language, you're starting from zero. How do you stay determined, right? To go through adversity, to go through challenges. And then the last piece, which my parents really instilled in me, and I think is so important wherever you are, and I think to being your authentic self, is character. Is that you have to know who you are, you have to know what you stand for, not in a way that's so too opposed to like other folks where you're like so stubborn in your character, but like it guides you and it really helps you make sure that you've got that integrity and that you bring that to the table in your personal and in your professional life. So they guide me, and their experience guides me, and those three principles guide me and have guided me, I think, throughout my entire career, and still continue to do so.
Being first generation born in the US or immigrating at a young age is such an interesting experience, and it's one that Edina and I share. The concept of being a third culture kid is having the culture of your home country, or the place that you live and call home, be different from the culture of your parents or your family. Now, in my case, I had Indian immigrant parents, but I lived in almost rural central Indiana. It's a big dichotomy, but we did assimilate a lot more to the American way of living by doing things like celebrating the same holidays as our neighbors. But there were definitely some elements of my differentness that I couldn't hide. I was one of very few non-white kids in my class at school. And of course, with a name like Sandhya Sudhakar, I was reminded every day that I wasn't like, as Edina mentioned it, the Jenny Johnsons of the world. Both Edina and I really both appreciate and embrace our family's immigrant stories and the cultures that we came from now. But when you're at those formative stages of growing up, oftentimes belonging takes the priority. You just want to fit in and be accepted and feel like a part of the group. And so I definitely relate to growing up in the 1980s and the 1990s and just wishing that I could have a name like Tiffany or Brittany. And my attitude about it now is very different, but I have a lot of compassion for young me and what she thought she wanted. Okay, let's get back to the conversation where Edina shares about how she's really embracing her authenticity and what's important to her in her work now. Yeah, so as we talk about authenticity, some of those principles are probably the ways that you show up at work really authentically, or they probably align with that in some way. And so what does being authentic in your career mean to you today?
I mean, yeah, authenticity is a broad term, right? And it can mean a lot of things. I'd say number one, it's being able to show up with and be able to provide value in the way that is rooted in my personality and in the way that I kind of do business and in what I can do. A few years ago, Publicis Groupe, which is the company I work for, they've got this great leadership training, and you go off for a week, and it's with, I think they're called Sherpa coaching. It's like a third party that comes in, and they help you identify your so what, your why it matters. And when I went through this exercise, what I'd come to the conclusion of is that my why it matters is to make an impact. And so, I've had many years of my career before then, but now it makes sense of like, for me, it's all about making an impact. And if I look back and I think about times where I didn't feel like I could be my authentic self, times where I got frustrated or chose to shift, it was because it kind of came in conflict with my ability to make an impact. So I think being authentic is being able to make an impact. It's being able to have an entrepreneurial mindset. I'm definitely not somebody who, wants to be put in a box. I'm somebody who you should be able to trust to give me a problem, or I'll find a problem and I will deliver on whatever that is. And being able to help people. So I think that, those are the things that are important to me from a professional standpoint in terms of bringing my authentic self.
Yeah. And so when you were in those roles or those times in your career where you weren't able to make an impact, or at least not in the way that you wanted to, or you could, what were some of those experiences like, and how did they kind of impact you?
I'd say one memorable one was, I was at a company, and again, I liked what I was doing in terms of helping clients outline their strategies, solving problems. But it was like this culture of hamster wheeling where decisions weren't being made and things kept, being set back or paused. And I'm a pretty patient person. I've got a lot of grit in terms of like, let's work things out and let's, but I remember going on vacation, and I'd gone back to Montenegro, and I was gone for 3 weeks, and I'd come back and nothing moved. I mean, not one thing. And I thought to myself, I was like, I can't do this. Like, I need a break. I can't be in PowerPoint decks. I can't be building things or creating things or trying to do things that aligned with your business and objectives, but yet we were at a stalemate. So I decided that I had to make a shift. And that's when, I'd stepped out of advertising as a whole. An old boss of mine had called me. She was in sales at a staffing agency. And she said, would you be interested in going into sales and coming into work for this company? And I met with her, and I thought, I've never really been in sales, like an official sales job. Didn't really know much about it, but learned from her and thought, yeah, I need a break. I need to step out of what I was in for so long to try something new, to create new experiences for myself, to challenge myself. And that was a great time. It was a great 3 years, worked with Fortune 500 companies, saw different angles outside of just media and advertising. And through that time, I was able to even figure out like what I wanted to go back to. I think like distance makes the heart grow fonder. And what I'd realized is that through that experience, I needed to go back into some facet of marketing, because I do love marketing. I love media. I love helping clients solve those types of problems. And so then I was able to really reorient myself to find the right place that would represent my values of being able to make an impact with the types of things that I was interested in doing, which then led me to Epsilon.
Before you left the industry, coming back from that 3-week trip and having recognized that there was no progress made, like, was it bureaucracy or just kind of inability to make decisions, or just too many cooks in the kitchen? What was going on at that organization at the time?
I think it was a couple of things. I think there was a lot of indecisiveness. It was kind of the, company not really knowing what they wanted to do, not having a clear purpose, the purpose kind of continuing to change. And I think just an acceptance, which is another pet peeve of mine, is like status quo, of like, this is how we do things and this is how things happen. And it's like, why? Like, I was the kid, like I was a pretty good kid when I was younger. I wasn't a bad kid, but I'd say I'd probably gotten a lot of trouble always for asking why a lot, like, and ask, like, I was challenging assumptions, from a young age. I think that's what it was. It was just that, there was nobody taking a step back and saying, this is not the way that we should be doing things. How do we improve this to, again, help you? and help the business versus being comfortable in a mindset of, well, this is how things are always done. And we have to do 50 versions of this. And do we though? Do we have to do it? I think that also is why I've fallen in love with, I read a lot and listen to a lot of podcasts around startups and first principles thinking. Mm-hmm. And so although I have never worked for a startup, and again, going back to the entrepreneurial mindset, having that first principles thinking of, again, challenging assumptions, I think one of the things that I love about working in a larger corporate setting is bringing that to the table and how do we apply startup mentality into large companies to help make things better. You've forgotten that you were once a very small company and you had to be agile and nimble. And now you're, thousands of people. Let's go back to when we were small and how we would think about things.
Yeah. And I want to come back to that when we talk about the role that you took on kind of that led you to where you are now. But
yeah,
when we talk about kind of, that tipping point, or maybe it was the deal breaker for you, right? Finally kind of coming back from vacation and seeing that it's the epitome of the thing that, made you kind of make the decision to leave. What in this, not necessarily even in this company, but what impact does it have on you mentally, physically, emotionally, to be in a place that kind of stays in the status quo or circles around things and doesn't have that kind of bias for action that I can tell you naturally have?
Yeah, it's depressing. I think it's I was burnt out, and I don't think I looking back at it, I still work a lot of hours. I don't think it has anything to do with how many hours you work. Right? Because if you love something, I do believe in that cheesy quote, if you love something, it feels like you never work a day in your life. I was mentally burnt out because of those limitations, and it just felt like it was stalling. And so I think it causes a level of dissatisfaction, of burnout, depression, or you're just this is just not, it doesn't give me life. It doesn't feed my why it matters. And so, yeah, I mean, you just become unhappy. There's no other way. It's just, you're just not happy. It's just not aligned.
I've done, and as I started my business, done quite a bit of research on burnout and understanding it, and also looking at it through the lens of our emotion, mental, physical, and emotional, kind of those three buckets are something that's really kind of very intrinsic to the work that I do. And what I found was that it's not just always, we often talk about burnout as physical burnout. I was physically drained, I was working too much, was exhausted. But there's also a such thing as emotional burnout, and there's also a such thing as mental burnout. And emotional burnout looks like demotivated. It looks like being cynicism. Why am I even showing up every day to this place when nothing's happening, and I'm not able to move the needle. I'm not able to have an impact here. And so it makes me think of that for you, is that almost that emotional bucket was just drained, not you were working all hours of the day and night and physically burned out, but empty bucket. I can't, I want to care and I can't care.
Yeah, absolutely. Empty bucket, totally empty, zero bucket. And it hurts, right? I think especially if you're somebody who, like myself, why it matters is you want to make an impact. My disc is I'm a big D, little I, I'm about driving action. My Enneagram is a challenger. And so, yes, again, hindsight tells me this. I didn't think about that at this time. Yeah. And so I think that's an interesting thing too. It's reflecting on it. It's oh my God, that's why I was not happy. That's what it was. And then being able to identify what are the things that you need to make you happy. I mean, and I don't know if it's happy, but fulfilled.
Right. Right.
Is key to help you understand what your next step should be, to make sure that it's aligned with what you want to do. So I think that looking back can help you, I think, understand how you want to move forward and what you want to avoid.
This concept of burnout got a lot of attention starting in 2020 with the pandemic. And it seems like it's really making a resurgence in this past year with a lot of people just feeling way past their capacity. overloaded, overcommitted, and exhausted. And just like the term self-care, burnout can often be overgeneralized. It's not just being really tired. What it is something that happens over time when you deplete more energy than you replenish. And it's not just about your physical energy, it's about your physical, mental, and emotional energy, or some combination of a couple of those, or maybe even all three. But often we don't see it coming or consider it a problem until we're kind of broken down. And so the idea here is to start to spot the signs earlier. I mentioned this during the conversation that when I started my business, I worked with a lot of clients who were kind of on the verge of burnout. And so I dove really deep into the topic. And according to the research done by psychologist Christina Maslach, the three main symptoms of burnout that you can try to spot are exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy. Now, exhaustion is this kind of profound state of tiredness, the kind of tiredness that days of sleep is not going to alleviate. Cynicism is what might be considered depersonalization. It's disengagement. Basically, it's distancing yourself psychologically from the work or detaching yourself from meaning, kind of like a sense of none of this really matters anyway. Inefficacy is having feelings of incompetence, maybe a lack of achievement and productivity, or feeling like you don't have the knowledge or the skills or the ability to do your work, or you're really trying to get things done, but you seem like you're just not able to be effective in your work or be productive. So Edina mentioned that when a team or a business is staying in indecision or accepting the status quo, that's actually something that's really super draining for her. And it's this kind of a lack of impact or lack of forward movement that's really the drainer. She mentioned that she's someone who often works longer hours and is okay with that. So working long hours wasn't the issue. It was the lack of movement, the stagnation that really drained her battery. Now, the opposite, having an impact or moving things forward, is an energy generator for her. This might have been a combination of not being mentally stimulated, a little bit of kind of inefficacy feelings, and not being emotionally connected or kind of feeling cynical about the work because it didn't feel like any amount of effort for her was going to change the fact that this company or this group was just kind of like wanting to stay put. Now, I had my own experience with burnout before I quit my job in 2019. This was the last job that I had working in an organization before I went on my sabbatical and went back to school and started my business. I was feeling really empty and unmotivated. And for me, it was having leadership that I didn't respect. I didn't have any connection to them really. I wasn't aligned with the business decisions that they were making. And this drove me to kind of a state of emotional burnout or having this kind of like drained battery in my emotional energy and distancing myself from my work, kind of experiencing that cynicism. My emotional connection to my work was gone. And I thought, why should I even try? Nothing I do is appreciated or my contributions aren't valued. So I'll share more about burnout in the wrap up, including some tools that can help you assess where you are and reflect on what's draining and generating energy for you in each of those buckets. Yeah, I imagine that it felt like a little bit of a breath of fresh air when you left the industry to go into a sales role where it's like high autonomy, like you make it what you want it to be. Did it feel that way to you?
Yes, it did. Very much high autonomy. You have to deliver. I'd never done cold calls before, and I remember having to deliver like 100 or so cold calls, figuring out how to build relationships and connect with people that you didn't naturally have access to, right? Like before, my clients were my clients. This is the account I worked on. Now you're trying to figure out how do I establish relationships with people who don't know me, who may not want to know me. I remember doing a cold call and one guy saying to me, "Don't you ever call me again." And so but I loved it because number one, you're nervous when you start, but you do it. And you get through the nervousness. Number two, I think that was the time where I uncovered that the worst thing somebody's going to tell you is no. And you just have this strong, thick skin that's developed, not to be tone deaf or, regardless of other people's, feedback, but just that the worst thing somebody's going to tell you is no. And so, yeah, it was a great experience. It gave me that latitude to try different things, different strategies on my accounts with clients. I actually started there. I wanted to do like A/B testing on outreach emails, like for the team. I was like, let's figure this out, because everybody'd say, oh, the best time to send in emails on a Sunday night or a Monday morning. And I'm like, well, let's do A/B testing. And so that kind of even tapped into some of my analytical stuff that I ended up moving into. Again, hindsight 2020, you connect the dots.
I imagine that's a great life skill to have, is like making a lot of cold calls, learning how to manage rejection. It's not personal rejection, but depersonalizing that can probably be hard for a lot of people too. And I bet you're great at a networking event.
What's interesting? I probably could be. Yeah, I don't do as much networking, but I probably could be, because I'm also an ambivert. So I'm not super extroverted. Like I can do both, and I need time to recharge. Yeah. But asking for the no, Noah Keegan talks about this. He's a startup founder of AppSumo, and he talks about go out and ask somebody for $1 or ask somebody for, just go and ask. And I think that's it's a great approach to get you comfortable in that. It also comes back to my childhood, where my parents would ask for discounts like everywhere. Like my mom would haggle at like the grocery store. I'm like, Mom, and I remember just being like so embarrassed. But she's like, if you don't ask, you don't know. And it's true. It's so true. And so, everything goes back to my parents. But like I think it's an important skill, and you shouldn't be afraid to do it in a mindful way, but you shouldn't be afraid to do it.
Yeah. Well, listen, my immigrant parents loved free stuff. So I get it, right? It's like, we are like very efficient with the spending.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I love that. Okay. So you left the industry, you came back into the industry, right? You connect the dots going backwards. Right? What was it like to come back into the industry, and what were you doing differently?
I didn't want to go back to an agency per se. I wanted to do something different. I didn't really know exactly what that was, but I knew that, again, I loved puzzles. I loved, solving problems. I loved being strategic and helping clients with their business. And so I'd come across a posting for Conversant. They were looking for a sales director, which is now Epsilon, on their digital team. And what I loved about kind of what drew me to that was it was all about people-based marketing, being able to connect people to brands. And I was like, I like this because this is important. I think there's something valuable here. And so when I met with them, they were smaller. It was very entrepreneurial, very gritty, very analytical. You had your book of business where you can focus and really dive in with your clients. And I loved it. Hours didn't mean anything. I had a client that I had to work every Sunday for. I had to deliver a report for them. And I did that for many years. And I did it. And and it was important to them. And it was important that I needed to deliver this to them. And so, but yeah, I love the agility. I love that you could be creative in helping clients with their solutions. And I love that, to me, it brought two things together, which, again, hindsight was missing, is that a lot of times, on the agency side, you're outsourcing because you're working with different platforms and different partners. So you've got a strategy in place, but you're not really touching the actual outcome. And I think that was missing for me. And so here I was able to both do the strategy as well as deliver on the outcome for the client. And I loved the combination of two. And to me, like, those two things are really important. And I would say are going to be really important for me moving forward. Like, it's just a key piece of, I don't want to just talk the talk. I want to show you that we can walk the walk and be a part of that full journey for any client that, we're working on.
Yeah. And so, you are now back at Publicis Groupe.
I
And
am.
so talk a little bit about how that
I
happened.
know, full circle. So it's funny because I was at Starcom earlier in my career. I worked on P&G strategy, which was like the best breeding ground and like learning experience in terms of, the clients were super smart. I mean, Procter and Gamble's got like best in class in terms of, how they approach things. The Starcom was fantastic. But it came, I didn't think it was going to happen. So it is funny. Epsilon was acquired by Publicis. And so is a part of the, Publicis Groupe. So you're like, wow, small world. I didn't think this was going to happen. And then I got tapped for an opportunity of, at least on the Epsilon side, like overseeing the Epsilon digital group business, making sure that we're thinking about the right strategy, how we're working across teams together, growth. And I think one of the reasons that, I was looked at for that is that I did have past agency experience. Like Epsilon wasn't really exposed much to agencies at that point. We were really working independently directly with clients. And then I was, some of the accounts that I'd taken on when Publicis had acquired us were engaging with agencies. And I was, doing a very successful job for Epsilon. And so I think they thought that that could be a good way to, how do you scale that and elevate that? That then led me to, have the opportunity to move over officially to Publicis Groupe, to like a newly created team where, we really support all group-owned, Publicis-owned solutions. So you've got programmatic from an Epsilon digital standpoint. You've got Epsilon Retail Media Network, Lyft and Apex. And really the goal is to help and make sure that, the right strategies and support and opportunities are available to all of the agencies and clients that are part of Publicis Groupe. So I took that on and oversee the Epsilon digital piece as well as the Epsilon Retail Media Network piece. And it's been an adventure. It's been a journey. Again, it goes back to what are the things that are important to me. It's like it's a puzzle I can figure out. There's a lot of opportunity. We're helping drive impact. Entrepreneurial, like my role wasn't fully defined. And so when I was coming over, I'm like, here are the things that I want to do. Here's how I see things growing. So I do think that if there was somebody else that had taken this role, it probably would have looked different than how I approached it. So I love that aspect of it, of being able to mold and influence.
Yeah. And so you seem like someone who thrives in ambiguity or kind of a big, hairy problem to figure out. Has that been a theme throughout your career? How's that shown up?
I think definitely. I would say that what I've realized I'm good at, sometimes I hesitate when I say I'm good at things. It sounds not because I don't want to give myself credit, but I'm always like, you can be better. Like, again, my parents creeping back in. But I do.
Right. We can always improve, but you could also be good at something that you can improve at later.
I'm still working on that. I have to say, it's funny. And you also don't really talk about yourself in this way, but I do think that what I've noticed is that I am good at looking at a problem, being able to critically think about it, really organize and understand like what's missing or what's the focus or where we need to go and who we need to get together with to move things forward. And it is not easy to do. And it is not easy to do in a matrix organization. It is not easy to do if you're working with, 3 to 4 different teams on one side and maybe 3 to 4 different teams on the other side. But I am good at that. And I think that's what's, helped make me successful in my current role as well, is being able to do that, being able to sift through things, galvanize people. A lot of people that don't report into you, like I've got a team, but you've got people that don't owe you anything and can make your life more complicated. But I think I'm good at leading with influence versus authority. For the greater good of whatever it is that we're trying to solve for.
Yeah. So what do you think people see in you or hear from you or learn from you that gets them kind of motivated to move forward on something?
It's a great question. I'm very direct, so I'm always honest. and in terms of what the expectation is. But I think my directness comes from a standpoint of, again, the purpose is larger than me. The purpose is larger than you. So being able to outline what is the bigger purpose here that we're trying to achieve, and bringing everybody to, I think, a common purpose. So they know that it's not like Edina's got some, ulterior motive, or, that I'm coming from the place of we can win together, we can do things together, and here is the bigger thing that we need to drive and that we need to do. So I think they see that in me. I think the other piece too is, I always say I'm kind. I'm not nice, I'm kind. And so I think that goes back to being authentic in the type of feedback, the type of communication that I have. Like, I don't think I could be nice for the life of me, or I'd just be quiet, because being nice is like, it's about, I wrote something about it. It was like, would you tell me if I had spinach in my teeth? Where, being nice, like you want to avoid those conversations. It's very surface level. Like, you can't make an impact if you're surface level. And so I need you to know that, like, we're in it together. I need you to know that there's something bigger than us here, an opportunity. And you're going to hear it direct, you're going to hear it straight, and I think you're going to get excited about it, and you're going to jump on board. And I'd say for the most part, it's worked out pretty well from the many teams that I've worked with, and the different personalities, like analytical people, integration engineers, strategy folks on the agency side, like, clients. And so I think they've appreciated that.
Yeah, it's like the directness. You talk about Enneagram Type 8, right? It's like, what you see is what you get. Like, I'm always going to be transparent with you, like, give you the real deal. And coming from a culture where you had to kind of observe and get along with everybody and different types of people and from different walks of life, right? As a child, it's like kind of those two things coming together of like, let me figure you out, what you need, and then I'm just going to tell you the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. And no, it's coming from a good place. Like, it really is. It's coming from a good place. It's really all about what's the best that we can do, which plays into the character piece. And so I think when you have the recipe like that, I think very few people would feel anything other than open to collaborating and working with you when it's that way. Because I do believe trust isn't given. I believe trust is earned. So, people have to earn my trust, and I want to earn people's trust as well. And so I try to come from that standpoint. I want you to know that, I don't think it's a given. You've got to earn it. And I want to earn everything.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, you had mentioned like, it comes across clearly that you're, passionate about the work that you do and the strategy and moving things forward. And you mentioned, working kind of every Sunday for a certain client and that you loved it. And it's, to me, we hear so many things these days where it's like, it's never okay to work on the weekends. You have to have these certain boundaries, or, your employer's taking advantage of you, or those types of things, right? I think there's a lot of projections and perceptions about people's choices. And I'm really curious, like, it seems like you're coming from a place of passion. What is that like for you, or what do you make of the fact that it was okay and good actually for you to work on the weekends?
Yeah. I mean, when you say it that way, maybe it's not that great, but I'm joking. The work on the weekends.
It's an individual choice, right?
The work on the weekends. When you think about it that way, like, for me, it was a part of what needed to be done. There was no other, at the moment, at that time, solution in place. Like, if there was, I would have taken it, obviously, right? But if there wasn't, then it goes back to, what do you have to do to get things done for the people that you care about and what's important, something bigger than you. And so I worked it into my life, and I worked it into my Sunday morning routine. And even when I was on vacation, I'd be like, yep, it's a Sunday. Let me get this done. And then we'll go to brunch or whatever. Like, it was, looking back at it, like, it's crazy. It was like a third arm, right? It like becomes a part of you. But the balance, like right now, I would never ask my team to work on the weekend unless they needed to. Like, I believe it's not about when you work, how long you work. I think it's about, are you delivering on the needs? If you can deliver on those needs in 5 business days between, if for in an 8-hour time frame, great. But if there are times when you're going to need to kind of lean in more to, again, deliver on the goal, then you got to deliver on the goal. And sometimes that means you got to suck it up and you got to do something on a Sunday or a Saturday, or you have to work till 10. But if you're delivering on a goal that's bigger than that. So I think that's one piece of it. I think the second piece of it is, and I tell my team this, like, is it really time worth well spent? Like, I don't like dog and pony presentations. I don't like dog and pony work. Like, let's do what matters most. And so if you take a look and say, am I doing things that matter most? Or am I just is there a lot of busy work in there? Then you should probably evaluate that, you can cut that out to make it, to balance that out more.
It makes a ton of sense. It's like you have a really good filter. Well, frankly, you have a really good filter for bullshit, probably, right? So it's like, I'm not going to work on a Sunday if it's meaningless.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so funny you say that, because I say that I have a nose for 2 things. I have a nose for opportunity and I have a nose for bullshit. And so, yes, yes. So I think that understanding both of those, I think will help guide you in terms of, is this an opportunity? Is this something that's important? Because if I don't do it, I will lose out, or we will lose out on X, Y, Z. Or is it not worth it? I mean, I'll write emails on the weekend now, and I won't send them until Monday morning. Like, it doesn't have to, I don't need to disrupt everyone else's life just because I had thought about something. I wasn't always that way. I used to, like, every idea, every exciting, I'm like, oh, we got to do this. It would be like 11 p.m. at night. I like send an email from my bed, or I was that person. And looking back, I was like, nobody ever said anything to me. They never complained, but I'm like, I shouldn't have done that. Right. Like, you learn, because you realize that even though you can put in your email signature, this is a time that works for me, maybe it's not a time that works for you, unless you're working with people asynchronously, like across the country, the world, try to minimize it, because nobody wants to get an email at 11 p.m. unless it's urgent, or nobody wants to get an email on Saturday when they're at brunch with their family, or they're at the park with their kids, or walking their dog, or whatever they choose to do. It does throw you off.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's kind of how I've shifted from that standpoint. Yeah,
it's this idea of, like, no matter how many times you tell your team, like, I support your balance, it's they'll see what you're doing, not necessarily just what you're saying, right? And take that, even if you have no intention of them acting on it at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's not necessary. I think one of my favorite books is The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. It's a great book if you haven't read it. If you have, he's good. He's got a podcast, right? Who hasn't read that book? But I think it goes back to that of, like, let's focus on what matters. Let's focus on when it matters. And let's just cut all the noise out. And just because I'm thinking about something at midnight, or I wake up at 4 a.m. and I start, doesn't mean everybody else needs to come along with me at that time. Like, unless it's super urgent, but like that's very rare. So let's be human.
I talk a lot about, and with leaders, but also on this podcast, about, like, impact versus intent. And so this is one of those situations where you're actually looking at the impact that might have on your people, of, like, getting an email at 11 o'clock versus the intent is like, hey, I'm just going to send this email out. Like, it's an idea. I don't expect them to act on it, but, like, closing that gap between how you intend it and how they might receive it, and making sure that you're taking that tiny extra step of, like, hitting schedule for later instead of sending now. I'm curious, as a leader, what are some of the other kind of major ways that you've evolved?
Mm-hmm. I'm definitely, as a driver, I can be impatient about things. And again, my energy flow is like quick, and like go. Taking a step back and, like, making sure that my impatience doesn't kick into high gear, and knowing that, again, everybody's not the same type, and everybody's not on the same, like, energy level. And so, again, unless something is super urgent or it's super critical, taking that down a notch. Like it just is not, it's not worth it. It doesn't help. It really doesn't yield better results. It just makes you feel good because you're getting out what you're feeling and you're reacting the way that you're reacting the way that you're most comfortable. And so learning to curb that. One of the things that I did with my team is we did our own why it matters. And so I shared which was very vulnerable. Like I shared my why it matters with my team. And I said, this is my why it matters. And these are kind of my top traits. These are also some of the cons that can come out of that. So we talk about one of my top traits is that I'm very driven. And I said, one of the cons of that is that I can become impatient. And then we also talked about the way that we want to communicate. And so I shared mine and they all shared theirs. And we kind of did this session together. And I think the great thing about that is that number one, we learned a lot about what drives us. Number two, it's like, what do we feel like our top skills are? What do we feel like the alternate to that is? And it provided a human aspect to it. I think it provided a deeper level of understanding of like why we communicate the way we do. Again, for myself, I said, if you see me getting impatient, it's because it's tied to my drive. And I said, and I want you to know, like, it's something that I'm actively working on to make sure that it's something that I curb. And I say, I actively have to curb it. So yeah, I think it brought us together. It wasn't something that I've ever seen like from a team dynamic to be that vulnerable to say like, this is a good thing about me. This is also bad things about me. Right. That's a vulnerable thing to say say to your team. But I thought it was needed. Like if we're going to operate effectively, if we're going to be successful, we need to be on the same page and understand kind of the ground zero.
To me, it just goes back to like, do you have enough self-awareness to know what your potential faults are, and are you willing to share those with your team? Because it's one of those things that builds psychological safety, right? It's like, yes, I am a leader in title, but that doesn't mean that I have it all figured out or I know all the answers or I'm going to be perfect all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. No perfection all the time. And you don't have all the answers, and that's why you have a team, so we can work together on things, and we leverage each other's strengths. And then I also, I'm open about, I'm going to push you on certain things, and these are the things that I think are important for your role and for our team, and you're going to feel uncomfortable, but I want you to know where that's coming from and why. It's not a gotcha moment; it's a growth moment.
I love what Edina says here about when we have these moments where we push each other to be better, they aren't gotcha moments, they're growth moments. But this does take some intention to make sure that that's the case. Now, I do this type of work with teams a lot. In fact, just last week I was with a team and we were working on communication and how we can meet each other in the middle. I have my natural style and you have yours. So how do we build our range or flex our style to meet each other and in essence, have an effective conversation? Because if you default to any one person's way of communicating, you'll likely not have the important information be fully received. In between what we say and how someone receives things, they're kind of like two places that there can be barriers. The first thing is how we say it. Our style of communicating, maybe it's very direct. You could come across as harsh, or maybe it's a style that prioritizes feelings and connections, and you could come across as wishy-washy. And neither are wrong. They're just different, and we have to meet in the middle to make sure that we receive what each other is saying. The second thing is what they hear or how they listen, the person that you're talking to. Believe it or not, we all have a filter that we listen through, and it determines what we pick up and how we perceive it. This is the second thing that can kind of impact whether or not communication is effective. How you say something and what the person hears or listens for. That gets in the way of, here's what I'm saying and here's what they're receiving. And actually, each of our Enneagram types has its own kind of unique default speaking style and default listening filters. And this was kind of the theme of the workshop that we did. Now, having these types of vulnerable conversations that Edina was talking about, opening up and being clear about our intentions in a conversation often can help us fill in the gaps between my style and yours. We build trust through this type of connection, and it allows us more leeway when we're having an off day, because you kind of have that foundation of trust and your team can assume that you're coming from a well-meaning place. Without this foundation of trust, everything gets questioned and anxiety builds up and things really start to go south. So let's get back to the conversation where we talk about how Edina practices self-regulation to ensure that her default style doesn't end up taking over. And so are there any like tools or practices that you have around kind of harnessing that energy and harnessing the bias for action so that it doesn't kind of go into impatience? Or like, what do you do for yourself to keep yourself grounded and balanced?
Walking is so important for me. Walking or doing some other kind of a task, because it helps remove me from the moment. I think it helps me get my energy out. Like I even think about like sometimes I'll stand while I'm talking because it like the energy kind of goes through. So I think those things help. And I think it's just a reminder of like control what you can control. And just trying to keep the element of humanity in the front, especially when you're a driver and you want to get to X result. So yeah, I think those things are key.
So you mentioned the startup mindset, and how can you bring the startup mindset to larger companies? I mean, we just talked about in your current team, you took on this role that was really very undefined and something that was kind of new and that you were able to shape and mold. How do you bring that startup mindset into the rooms with you?
I think it goes back to like my approach of, the purpose is greater than me. Seeing that, does this make sense for us collectively? We may not all agree in maybe my approach, but my intent is there. I think you have to have courage over fear. When you work in a large organization or you're, whoever you're presenting to, whatever you're trying to drive, you're going to have a little bit of fears. Like, is this going to be rejected? Is this going to be something that's going to be disapproved of? But it goes back to like courage and like the startup mindset of saying like, this is something that I think is really important. I think that this is something that is, validating it through, are you doing the right thing? And then just bringing that forward, identifying the right people that you need to talk to, getting early buy-in, painting the vision and showcasing like what the value exchange is. And not giving up. I think it's the grit piece too. Like, it's not all figured out, but, a lot of other things that I want to do in advance. And I think just knowing that I can do those things, even though they're going to be hard, or is motivating, and knowing that there's going to be some, positive outcome. So,
yeah. I mean, even in that, like the idea of like courage, it's like sharing ideas that might be out of the box or taking big risks, right? Not huge risks, like not, major multi-million dollar risks with client money, but being able to kind of bring those different new and interesting ideas forward. I mean, courage is the like bringing an idea to the table that might seem kind of ridiculous sometimes.
Absolutely. And it can even be as small as, we're talking about an objective or a strategy. And, I've been in situations where I've been one of 10, one of 5, one of 20, and I have to speak up because I don't think that we're going in the right direction, not because I want to be heard. So those are two different things. It's like ego-driven wanting to speak up versus purpose-driven wanting to speak up. I think those are two different things. So ego-driven, it's like you should probably be quiet. Purpose-driven is about understanding and saying like, I actually think because of whatever we're trying to do, I need to share this opinion, whether you like it or not. I'm going to share it in a respectful way, but I'm going to share it because I think that there is some good value to the conversation that you have. And so you have to trump fear. Everyone's got fear. And you have to think about, if I don't say this, what is the potential impact? And will I regret it not saying it?
Yeah. So I was actually just going to ask you, what's the process that you take yourself through when you have those moments where you have to speak up? And so kind of questioning like what might happen if I don't say it. Is there anything that you do for yourself in those moments to kind of help support yourself?
Yeah, I think you should always try to, and it's opposite of my impatience, I try to be thoughtful in, again, it goes back through, is this ego driven or purpose driven? If it's ego driven, be quiet. If it's purpose driven, what are those things that you see that maybe others don't? And then just say it and just do it, and maybe it's not right on the call. Maybe it is a follow-up. Like you'll have to find the right, I think every situation is different in how you approach it. But I would say like, that's what you have to think about. You have to think about, will I regret saying this? Will I regret not saying this? And what is it really geared towards? Like, what am I really trying to accomplish for the greater good of, again, the team or the client or the objective or whatever it is? I had a moment where there was a situation where there was like wanted to kind of influence a complete strategy shift to kind of one of the offerings that we have. And their perspective was like, well, it's all the same. And I was like, it is not all the same. And like, I remember being in a room with like 10, 15 people, being the only one who had to now defend and outline and communicate the why and be the challenger. Thankfully, I think everyone saw that and got on board, and we were able to, I think I was able to help them navigate of like, let's analyze this together. Let's outline the pros and cons. Let's talk about how we do this together, and then able to lead them to the conclusion that I was already at. But yeah, you have to do it if you feel like it's wrong for the business.
Yeah. So what's next for you, whether it's career development, leadership development, maybe balance or something personal? How are you growing in this moment?
How am I growing? So going back to that leadership session that I went to, they had asked me, they're like, well, what do you want to do in 5 years? And I was like, I don't know. And I remember writing down on paper, I think everybody like wrote down a title and whatever. And although those things are important, right? Like career growth is important. You want that to be commensurate with your value that you provide. I remember writing down, I don't want to have any regrets. And I don't think I was ever living a regretful life, but I like doubled down on it to make sure that I was still being authentic to myself, authentic to my purpose. And so part of that was, I launched a newsletter, like a blog on Substack. I love writing. And so how do I write and provide my perspective on things like positive disruption, on how to think past limitations, how to focus on what matters. And so that's something I've committed to because I don't want to live with regrets. I want to keep pushing and driving from a growth standpoint in my current role. I think it's important. I believe in the solutions that we're offering. I love helping clients. And then I think that the people on the team, it's like, I want to see my team succeed. I think we've got some really interesting opportunities to grow and advance. And so again, just a lot of puzzles I want to unlock, but continue to stay true to myself. So nothing to say like I want to do X, Y, Z specifically, but I think it's about living with no regrets and making sure that everything I'm doing is in line with that in whatever step or place I'm at.
Amazing. I think that's a great note to end on. So thank you so much for being on. It was really exciting to hear about your story and just even how you're embodying your own leadership style and transparency and directness. But like, it is very clear that there's a lot of care in the foundation of all of it.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Well, we really went on a journey in this episode, all the way from Edina's roots in Montenegro to her big career pivot out of the communications agency world and back into it. And we talked about how she leads her team and is super transparent about where she excels and where she has some growth work to do. Now, I think this type of leadership is so needed in today's workplaces, and I can't stress enough how important it is to work on trust building and effective communication. I think in the past, we kind of just assumed these things were a given, and they really are not. We're often moving so fast in our work that misunderstandings can very easily turn into conflict on tasks or situations. And that type of conflict or miscommunication can spiral into relationship challenges. And it's so much easier to address these challenges in your team dynamics before they get to the point of relationship conflict. Now, if you're interested in finding ways to communicate more effectively on your team, or you need to work on building up that foundation of trust, I'd love to have a conversation with you. And you can reach out to me on any platform, LinkedIn or Instagram, or you can actually just schedule a short meeting with me on my website, selfatwork.com. Now, let's dive back into the conversation about burnout and talk about some tools. As I mentioned, based on the research done by psychologist Christina Maslach, there are 3 main symptoms of burnout, and those are exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy. And burnout is really when you deplete more energy than you replenish and you end up with an empty bucket, whether it's physical energy, mental energy, or emotional energy that's drained, or some combination, or all of those. We often don't see it coming until it's too late. And so it's important to take inventory and spot where you kind of might be at risk of a leaky bucket or an empty bucket. So let's do a quick energy check-in. First, we're going to check in with your physical energy. Do you feel rested when you wake up in the morning, or are you giving your body the rest that it needs? Are you nourishing it with things that are healthy and help you maintain your level of physical energy? Let's check in with your emotional energy. Do you feel connected to your work in a meaningful way? Are you motivated by your company or your team or the type of work that you do? Or do you feel connected to the people that you work with? And let's check in with your mental energy. Do you feel focused and productive during the day? Are you doing work that you know you're great at? Or do you feel that way most of the time? Do you have the skills and the resources that you need to do what you need to do? Now, if one or more of these answers is a no, it might be time to take some steps to replenish your energy. So I'm going to link a worksheet that I've created for some workshops that I've done before that can take you through an inventory of what helps you generate energy and what drains it in each of those buckets. And it's important to note that we can actually fill our buckets. It's not just a losing proposition. We do need to stop the leaks in our buckets, but we can also add in good things, and that will help us prevent burnout. So this worksheet will help you go through both the generators and the drainers, and then you can figure out where to stop the leaks and where to add more good stuff in. And as always, I just want to remind you to think about what is practical. Identify one small thing, one baby step, or one little change that you can implement and start there. And once you integrate that, see how you feel, and maybe you try a second thing to integrate. We don't need to reinvent our entire daily routine overnight. We can take these little steps toward recovery or preventing the burnout from happening.